Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi, nice to meet you. Today we're going to learn about giving advice and suggestions academically. Still with me, Mr. Benny Crispiantoro in meeting 5 of Academic Speaking, English Education Department, Harapan Bangsa, University of Purwakarta. What are some important things to think about when you plan your career or look for a job? Read the article on advice for people looking for jobs. Which suggestion do you think is the most useful? Can you answer those questions? Awesome! Now it's time for you to read this text. I would like to show you the text and I give you 5 minutes to read the text. The title of the text is about the right job for you. In this text, there are some phrases or expression used when you want to give advice and suggestions. For example, you ought to think about these things. You should ask yourself exactly what you want from a job. You also might want to think about your personal relationships. You should make changes before you take a new job. Or probably you want to use had better not. Have you ever heard the expression had better not? This is an advice, a negative advice by using not. For example, you had better not work for a company that expects you to be on call 24/7. Or you may say, you could also call the company. So the word could can be used when giving advice and suggestions. Now, I want you to check your comprehension about the text. So please do the comprehension check yourselves. We have 4 questions, and I want you to tell me what the correct answers are. For example, number 1, everyone wants the same things or a different thing from a job. What's your answer? The same things or a different thing? Number 2, looking at your personal relationships can or cannot help you learn more about how you relate to co-workers. Can or can't? It's easy or difficult to make changes after you have started a new job. You can have a look at back on the text you've already read in the previous slide. Everyone or not everyone uses common sense when they look for a job. What's your answer? What is the correct word? Everyone or not everyone? Now, another activity. I want you to find the sentences in the article and complete them. For example, according to the experts, you blah 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 think about these things. I want you to answer number 1, number 2, and number 3. In these sentences, do ought to and should show advice or show ability? Does could show ability or make a suggestions? Let's learn together about the expressions used in giving advice and suggestions. The first thing that you have to do is we're going to learn about the use of should, ought to, and had better because they are often used to give advice. For example, repeat after me. You should ask yourself exactly what you want from a job. You had better make changes before you take a new job. Please have a look The word should, the position is between the subject and the verb. You should ask, not you should to ask or you should asking, but you should ask. Should followed with verb 1. Another example using had better. You had better make changes before you take a new job. The subject is you and the verb is make, and the word used is had better. Remember the pattern, the subject plus had better plus verb 1. You cannot say you had better to make, no, or you had better making, no, or you had better made, or the verb to make, but directly to verb 1. You had better make. Or probably some people like using a contraction, you'd better make. So you'd means you had. Now, if you want to make a statement, so please have a look at the form subject plus modal verb or had better. If it is negative, so you may say had better not, and base form of verb or verb 1. For example, repeat after me. I should make changes. You shouldn't make changes. He should not make changes. We ought to make changes. We ought not to make changes. They had better make changes. And remember, the meaning of ought to is should. Yes or no questions and responses. If you want to give an advice or suggestion using yes or no questions and responses, Mr. Benny would like to give you the explanation. So you have to use should, subject, verb 1, and responses. For example, should you take a different job? Yes, you should. Yes, she should. Or if you want to answer with negative sentence, you can say no, you shouldn't, or no, she shouldn't. Information questions. WH word, should, subject, and verb 1. For example, when should I call? Who should you call? When should he call? Using should, ought to, and had better for advice. Number 1. Use should and ought to for general advice. You should assess yourself before you look for a job. She ought to look for a job. Remember, for general advice. B. Use had better not if it is negative. If it is positive, so you only use had better. Use had better not only for very strong advice and warnings. Remember, very strong advice and warnings. Had better not is much stronger than should or ought to. It suggests that something negative will happen if you don't take the advice. We usually only use it in speaking. So in writing, it's rarely found in writing. For example, you had better finish this project or you might lose your job. Number 3, you should use should in questions. Ought to and had better are not common in questions. Remember that. Should I ask about the salary at the interview? Use maybe, perhaps, or I think to soften advice. This expression usually go at the beginning of the sentence. Maybe you should be more careful when you write your resume. I think he ought to look for a different job. You can also use probably to soften advice. It can go before or after should. It goes before ought to. She probably should take the job, or she should probably take the job. Remember the position? Probably can be between subject and should, in the middle, or after should. She probably ought to take the job. That's right. But you cannot say she ought to probably take the job. That's not right. Because the position of probably goes before ought to. Should not is much more common than ought not to. You can use should not in both speaking and writing. Data from the real world. Research shows that people often make advice stronger by adding really. Really can go before or after should or shouldn't. You should really get advice from a career advisor. When really goes before should or shouldn't, it is stronger. You really shouldn't quit your job before you found another one. It means that it's stronger advice because the position of really is before the word should not or should. Really goes before ought to and had better. So never ever use really after the word ought to or had better. For example, you really had better try to keep your current job. You really ought to update your resume. You cannot say you ought to really update your resume, but you really ought to, not you ought to really. Do you understand? Right, very good. Suggestions. After we learn about how to give advice, it's time for us to learn about how to give suggestion. If you want to give suggestion, you can say might want to, could, why don't you, or why doesn't he, and why not are often used to make suggestions. Suggestions are not as strong as advice. For example, you might want to schedule your interview in the afternoon. Why don't you prepare questions for the interview? Suggestions with might want to and could. For example, you might want to call the company, or we might not want to call the company, or they could call the company. Suggestion with why don't or why doesn't. For examples, why don't you ask? Why doesn't he ask? Suggestion with why not. For example, why not buy a new suit for the interview? You cannot say why not to buy or why not buying, but directly verb 1. Why not buy a new suit for the interview? Making suggestions. Use might want to and could to make suggestions. They often express a choice of possible actions. For example, you might schedule your interview in the morning, or you could wait until the afternoon. Number 2. Might is often used with want to. You might want to think about volunteer work. You might not want to ask that question in interview. Number 3. Don't use could not in negative suggestion. You must use might not want to. For example, you could not ask the question in interview, but you have to say you might not want to ask the question in interview. So once again, remember, don't use could not in negative suggestion. Why not and why don't or why doesn't are both questions form and end with a question mark. For examples, why don't you prepare question for your interview? Or why not prepare questions for your interview? Why don't or why doesn't and why not are very common in conversation. But remember, don't use them in academic writing. For example, you can say, why don't you practice for your interview? If it is in writing, interviews might want to practice for their interviews. Avoid common mistakes. Don't forget had or apostrophe D when you write had better. For example, the sentence, you better start looking for another job, it's not correct. You may say, you had better start looking for another job. Use had better not only for very strong advice and warnings. For example, at an interview, you had better speak clearly and look interested in the questions. Because this is not a strong advice, so you can say, at an interview, you should speak clearly and look interested in the question. Number 3, don't use could not in negative suggestion. Instead of using could not, you must use might not want to. For example, you could not wear jeans for the interview. This is wrong. The right one is you might not want to wear jeans for the interview. Number 4, don't use an ing form or a to infinitive after why not. Why not going to a career advisor? This is wrong. The correct one is why not go to a career advisor? Why not to leave at 6 a.m.? This is also incorrect. The correct one is why not leave at 6 a.m.? Now, I want you to find and correct 5 more mistakes in this conversation. This conversation is between Jordan and Isabella. I give you one example. Well, you better probably start looking for something else. This sentence is incorrect because it missing had. Well, you had better. Not well, you better probably, but well, you had better. Now it's your turn to find more mistakes in this conversation. And here you are the answer. You better, you had better. Why not asking? It should be why not ask. Why not to talk? It should be why not talk. You could not complain. It should be you might not want to, because you cannot use could not for negative suggestion. Now once again, before we finish our online class, I want you to remember that the writers use should, ought to, had better, and might want to describe ways to solve problems, offer solutions, and say why the solutions are good. These models are common in magazine articles, advice column, personal emails, and other texts that give people advice. Remember, use had better only to give strong advice or warning. You can make advice stronger with really before or after should. When really goes before should, it is even stronger. You can soften advice with maybe, perhaps, and I think at the beginning of the sentences. For example, perhaps he shouldn't wear those pants to the interview. Once again, practice makes perfect. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.